Today's show is sponsored by Do It. Cloud spend is just the surface. What really matters is how it drives performance, reliability, and speed to market. Do It Cloud Intelligence aligns every dollar to the intent of the workloads. Do It is trusted by companies like Fiverr, HackerRank, Current, and Superbet. Do It helps teams go beyond dashboards, surfacing hidden inefficiencies, resolving incidents faster, and aligning cloud operations with business priorities. One platform, unified signals, better outcomes across engineering and finance. Visit doit.com, that's DOIT.com, to unlock intent-aware FinOps at scale. Do It Cloud Intelligence.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well, getting towards the end of August of 2025. The year's flying by. Hope everybody's doing well. And wanted to, another weekend perspective, if you will, and wanted to dive into kind of a topic that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially as we're sort of going through what I consider kind of a transition of, I don't want to say the end of the cloud era, but sort of the later stage of the cloud era. It's now been, if I go back to, AWS sort of launching the cloud in 2007, we're now 18 years into it. So, probably has another 10 years or so to go, but it feels like it's become, kind of a secondary priority in terms of what people are thinking about right now. A lot of people obviously are thinking about the beginning of the cloud era, and we begin to see some overlap between the two of them. And it kind of got me thinking, because again, it's been 12, 15 years or so since we sort of started to see the transition from kind of the era of people building things in their data centers and sort of traditional IT to what cloud did in terms of on-demand computing and self-service and resources, lots of resources available to people and all those sorts of things that kind of happened with the cloud era. And I kind of wanted to think about, kind of what we might expect to see from the transition as we start to transition into the AI era. Some of the things that we would expect to see repeat, we see between eras, and some of the things that we'll probably get wrong in the interim, or will appear to be wrong in the interim, and sort of dig into some of those things. So we're going to dig into that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Vasion Print. Technology should drive your business, not slow it down. But legacy print systems are a resource suck. Don't waste time and money managing print when there's a solution. Vasion Print, formerly known as Printer Logic. Eliminate resource-intensive print servers and make the switch to an intuitive, cloud-native solution that makes printing effortless for IT teams and end users. Reduce attack surfaces and secure your environment while enjoying cloud-native flexibility that's easily supported in a hybrid workforce. It's not a patch or a fix. It's a truly seamless solution for print. See for yourself by scheduling a demo at vasion.com. That's VASION.com. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dig into a little bit of kind of what we should expect to see with this transition as we start to sort of prioritize the AI era over the cloud era, if you will. And again, as you will learn over time, and as we've iterated on this show and highlighted on this show many, many times, there very rarely is sort of the end of any given technology. There's very rarely something completely stops being used. I guess maybe rotary phones, but gosh, that's been 50 years, or some things along those lines. But very rarely do we see the complete end of a technology. Maybe a BlackBerry phone or something like that. Maybe it would be a more relevant, recent type of thing. But we don't see that very often. We do begin to see kind of people characterizing an era in terms of its best practices, when it started, what the momentum is around it. They start to measure things within an era. And obviously we, for the last few years have been very much in, the AI era, or the Gen AI era, if you will, in terms of, kind of what the industry is focused upon, where we're seeing a lot of investment, where we're seeing a lot of speculation about what might happen, a lot of experimentation to try and figure out, how this new technology, this new way of doing things, this new way of thinking about things is going to impact our world in terms of how we work and live and play and all the other things around that technology impacts these days. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of start to dissect, start to break down what we learned from sort of the last transition as we moved into the cloud era, and what can probably expect, at least in the early periods of the AI era, and things to sort of watch out for if you weren't around during the beginning of the cloud era. So a couple of things I've written down. I wrote down about, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen things here, kind of go through them. The early stages of a new era tend to be, somewhat separate, right? So, we had the idea of cloud native when cloud was getting started, public cloud was getting started. People talked about, we built something cloud native, only using the new native tools. We weren't using any previous sort of best practices, any patterns. We were just trying to build it completely native and figure out, what that looked like. And so we're already beginning to see some people talk about, AI native practices, AI native companies, AI native tools, if you will. And so, we do tend to see at the beginning of an era, and again, the beginning could be 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, some period of time in which we tend to see I would expect we will see a lot of talk about people doing things in an AI native way, right? And then eventually what happens as the technology becomes more mainstream, as the earliest adopters, whether that's in terms of skill sets or in terms of companies, people begin to compete with them, or the technology becomes more mainstream. We tend to see the technology kind of come back, if you will, and we see a blurring between sort of the native capabilities and the things that are needed to interact and integrate with existing business process, existing technologies, and so forth. And whether we call that hybrid or something else, I would expect to see that from an AI perspective. So we will see things that are built completely on only AI native tools and platforms. But over time, we're going to see that have to integrate back into the things that we do in mobile and the things that we do in typical sort of web interactions, interacting with our existing applications and platforms, whether that's augmenting them or modernizing them. So I'd expect to see that, but I do expect that we will have a period here in which there will be people that kind of scoff at anything that's not AI native. We will begin to hear some best practices around that, which will be great, which will hopefully to a certain extent move us forward in terms of new patterns, new ways of doing things, and potentially unlock some new ideas that we'd never really seen before. Same way that we saw this with when cloud first got started, and we saw like people like Netflix and others talking about how they were building out their environments, how they were testing differently, how they were able to deal with scale and redundancy and resiliency and all sorts of stuff. I expect we'll begin to see those types of things with AI as well. Assuming with AI that sort of AI native stuff will include things like AI agents and companies that are built primarily predominantly with sort of AI specific things. Again, whether that's looking at it from the number of humans to number of agents, or just the scale at which something can operate, where those things will be. So we fully expect that to become a more prevalent conversation over the next couple of years. The second thing I had on my list was a couple of, kind of timeframes in terms that, and I've seen this over a couple of different era transitions. So, I expect something similar. Again, with AI, things might accelerate a little bit, but typically, you still have humans and human learning curves and technology learning curves and technology, stabilization that all has to happen. So it usually takes about a decade, about 10 years before an era stops being important or prioritized, right? So, from that perspective, it's going to be a little while. And again, let's say we're 2 or 3 years into this AI era. That would probably say, somewhere between 6, 7, 8 years before people sort of stop talking about cloud as an important thing to what they do. It just sort of blends into the background. And we've seen this with other, technology trends that have happened, and it just sort of becomes, the norm of what you do. So usually takes about a decade before the previous era stops being sort of important or prioritized. And usually takes about 3 to 5 years before we start to see best practices for these new applications emerging. And so, again, we are a couple of years into the sort of post ChatGPT era. So we're just starting to begin to see, okay, this is how you should, best build, an AI application. In terms of thinking about everything from like, should I make it model specific? Should I make it model agnostic? How should I be able to switch between things? What's a good user experience? We're just beginning to experience that. And again, you think about this. Think of all the conversations we've had on here just about like coding agents, right? So if we think about the two most predominant use cases so far for generative AI, they tend to be some form of chatbot, if you will, a chat GPT of whatever flavor it needs to be, and then some sort of coding assistant. And, if we think about just in the last few months alone, whether it was Copilot, to the sort of integration with VSC, VSC code, VS Code, excuse me, or whether it's sort of the integration with like how Cursor does things. We're now starting to see things down at the CLI level. Like we're still 3 years into this sort of Gen AI thing. We're just beginning to kind of dig into like what's a good user experience. A number of them are sort of coming all at once. So maybe even 3 to 5 years is a little aggressive in terms of the best practices for new applications. But even if we just think about it purely in terms of coding assistance, that we're kind of at that 3 year stage. We're just beginning to see people go, oh, okay, there are alternatives to the first thing that came out. So maybe 2 years from now, which would put us in the 3 to 5 year range, we'll start to have kind of best practices emerge, and people will kind of feel like, okay, this is the one that's kind of won out. So just a couple of things to sort of keep in mind in terms of timelines and timeframes of, when you would expect to see certain things like that happen. And even with ChatGPT, we're still seeing that emerge in terms of, just like the most basic user experience thing. Like how much should I think about which model I'm using, right? GPT-5 now has this sort of model router where I shouldn't have to think about it, but I still have some options. People are thinking about what's the tone in which models work. Should I have the concept of memory? And again, these are sort of, 3 years into this. We're just beginning to kind of grasp these concepts. It'll probably take a couple more years before we start to go, okay, for that specific use case, what are the favorites? What's emerged as really sort of the pattern that people are using. They're finding efficiency with it. They're finding familiarity with it. All that sort of stuff. So still maybe 3 to 5 years is going to be aggressive. Maybe it's 3 to 6 years or 3 to 7 years. Anyways, next thing I have on my list. In any new era, and again, we've seen this with the internet. We've seen this with mobile. We've seen this with kind of the move to the cloud, and obviously now we're seeing with AI and so forth. In any new era, finding talent is extremely difficult and very expensive, right? And we're going to see all sorts of headlines about people getting, like a certain select number of people getting huge salaries. We've already seen that. Obviously, we're going to see teams that build one or two successful things at company X, then realize that there are 50 companies in line that would love to have the same sort of thing. You're going to see those teams and groups of people sort of jump around. We've seen a little bit of that. We've seen that with previous generations and so forth. But the good news is that if your company doesn't necessarily have access to that talent or that pool of resources, there is still very much an opportunity for your organization to be looking at, what can you optimize in the current era? What can you optimize around your cloud environment, around your private cloud, your public cloud? What you do with DevOps, what you do around automation, what you do around governance, what you do around self-service. There's going to be big opportunities to continue to invest in those types of things, but also look at, how can those things continue to get better, because they will be foundational to what eventually, the digital do in the AI era and so forth. So, don't feel like just because you're watching all these people talk about, how much money they're making, the few super geniuses doing AI or SGI or AGI or whatever. There's still huge opportunities, to improve your organization around what you could modernize for what's out there today, and again, make that a really good platform, highly automated, highly scalable for what's coming next. Whenever AI becomes potentially a mainstream thing at your organization. Next thing I had on my list is we are definitely, and we've already seen this somewhat, we're going to definitely see the same way that we saw shadow IT moving to the cloud, we're going to see shadow AI, or, even the concept of like Bi-Modal sort of cloud and AI. So, shadow IT was kind of the idea that you could sort of bypass the IT organization, lines of businesses were doing this, and going straight to the public cloud and just sort of, doing the thing that IT used to do, but you could sort of skip them. You could do it the way that you wanted to. We're already starting to see that somewhat with with AI in environments, and we're going to see some reckoning happening with that when the bills start coming in, and we're already starting to hear some things like that from organizations. But we're also going to see some sort of bifurcation that happens within organizations where people that are working on AI sort of stand themselves out as more important or more skilled or more capable. The people that work on sort of cloud or infrastructure or kind of foundational things will sort of get pigeonholed as well, the stuff you're working on is useful but not as important as cutting edge as this new stuff is. And again, this happens with every era. Gartner sort of became famous for coming up with this idea of Bi-Modal IT, but really, it was the transition from a faster moving environment that had a lot of unknowns, a lot of risks, a lot of other things, but had a lot of potential. Same sort of characteristics apply to AI today. So we're going to see the idea of sort of bimodal IT, except the bimodals will be between cloud and AI going forward, or at least for a period of time. There will be a lot of given thing X is dead articles written, talks at conferences and so forth. This is always the sort of famous line, the rallying cry for anybody working on new stuff. So you're going to see, you're going to hear, lots and lots of. We've already seen a lot of this. AI is going to displace X amount of jobs. These types of jobs are completely irrelevant. Old technology, technology X is dead because of AI. People love to write these articles. The press loves, the idea of sort of, pure winners and losers. They love the idea of sort of blood and guts, if you will. It's a terrible analogy, but like, the X is dead sort of theme or trope, if you will, is always happens when we see new technologies, and you always see the people that are building the new technologies. It's their great way of motivating the market to say, hey, I know what I'm talking about more than you. I see the future of what's going on. And if you don't recognize that thing that I don't sell is no longer relevant, and that you should be focused on my thing, it's a kind of a great attention grabber. But the reality is, and Aaron and I have talked about this a million times. People will eventually remember, and they'll eventually realize that very rarely does anything die, at least especially in the enterprise. Lots of things stick around forever. Do they get lower priority? Sure. Do they get oftentimes less budget? Sure. Do they eventually become, the sort of target of hackers looking for, weak points within your organization? Sure. But a lot of the, X is dead tropes that will happen over the next couple of years, and we've already seen it from a number of the sort of prognosticators around AI. Oftentimes those things don't tend to pan out, and oftentimes you can kind of ignore them. But they're interesting for a little while. It's interesting to watch who's bold enough to say it, but doesn't usually pan out to be too much. And then the last thing I had on my list is we're going to see a lot of numbers and reports coming out that seem very, very contradictory. And what I mean by that is, and the most recent of these is, we see, just billions and billions of dollars being pumped in terms of investment around AI. So on one hand, you go, lots of smart people who have access to a lot of money, are making huge bets on this technology. So there must be something fundamental there that they believe is worthwhile of these gigantic investments, gigantic bets, if you will. And to a certain extent, we've seen enough stuff from generative AI to go, it's pretty powerful. It potentially could do a lot of interesting things if figured out and used in the right way and so forth, right? On the other hand, we're already starting to see some articles come out. I'll put a link in the show notes. There was one recently that said MIT did this study, and the vast majority of CFOs are seeing very little to no ROI value in the early projects with AI. And this is like enterprise kind of businesses and so forth. And so that's the kind of stuff that, takes very much the other side of that conversation and goes, whoa, if all this money is being pumped into it, but yet, and which, and then lots of, POCs and projects are kicking off, but those projects aren't generating any sort of returns, or we're beginning to see, lots of the startup companies who, had done stuff in this space and tried to be a wrapper around, an API, or, they were trying to be a clone of something. They're struggling quite a bit, or even just the, um, hey, there's no more internet, there's no more data for the internet to, for these models to train on, right? We're going to see all kinds of stuff like this. And, I think the thing that people have to remember is we're still in such a early stage of all this stuff. People are still trying to figure out, like, even what does it do, and what's a set of technologies that I feel like I can build on that's not changing all the time, or that, am I investing in something that 2 months later or 3 days later or something else is getting completely upended, right? We saw this, earlier in the year in the March timeframe when DeepSeek came out, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, somebody built a model that cost far less and runs on, less powerful GPUs. Oh my gosh, the whole NVIDIA OpenAI, you know, um, you know, stack that's been put together is everything we know about that is completely irrelevant, right? And we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing a lot of this, what feels like every week in the AI space, in some cases every month in the AI space. And, some of these things are going to, they proliferate because of social media. They proliferate because the news picks up on them. A lot of times these things are proliferating because there has been so much money pumped into this. And the thing to remember is there is so much money being pumped into this because on the consumer side of things, the world has sort of figured out, the investors have sort of figured out that if AI becomes some gigantic system, i.e., like Google with ads, or Facebook with ads, or Microsoft in the 80s and 90s with the operating system and the Office stack, or something, these dominant technology, Apple with the iPhone and the App Store and everything. They're betting, completely a winner take all. And so the amount of bets in here on so many things, the hope is I'm going to have money be invested in the thing that is the winner take all, because their belief is that somehow in this, it's going to displace one or parts of a few of those major systems that people rely on, whether, again, it's some aspect of the mobile phone, or search and advertising, or, some core aspect of the internet. And that's fair. They've sort of seen that those markets become, very, winner dominant, if you will. Again, maybe it's OpenAI, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's Google, maybe it's somebody we haven't even seen yet. But that's the reason why there's so much money going into it, because they don't want to get left behind on that. But again, the thing to keep in mind is the consumer behaviors, the consumer growth, and so forth doesn't necessarily mimic what actually happens in the enterprise, which has a much longer scale, has much different requirements, has much different, acceptance criteria and all those sort of things. And so, you just have to sort of calibrate your brain to say, look, I'm going to see all those things. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to read them. I'm going to try and analyze them and figure out what they are. But not every single one of them needs to be a complete whipsaw of, super positive, super negative, super positive, super negative. Everything's great. Everything's terrible. That sort of thing that we're seeing a lot of right now, because again, people aren't totally familiar with this technology. The economic model of AI hasn't begun to prove itself out yet. Just the technology is proving itself out, but the economic model hasn't proven itself out yet. And so there are tons of organizations trying to be well positioned for when things start to get figured out. But in the interim, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty is the simplest way to put it. A lot of unknowns, and because we're dealing with such big dollars, there is going to be a natural tendency that there will be certain people, organizations, whatever, that are very determined to make sure it's successful, and there are people who are, I don't want to say very determined, but are very pragmatic, that there's no way that this is going to be what it's kind of prognosticated to be, right? And that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with sort of being on either side of that. The trick to remember is just, again, you're going to get whipsaw headlines for a long period of time. For probably another year or two, you're going to get whipsaw headlines frequently. And we're never totally sure which one of them is going to be the thing that is the breakthrough that goes, oh, that we've reached that point in which there's some clarity that's been created. So, anyways, that's just some stuff to think about for the next couple of years in terms of, based on some historical things we've seen, based on some stuff that we've seen in the early couple years of this new AI generation, and some stuff that you could expect to see just based on kind of how markets work and the expectation that, even if this AI stuff is completely new, there are certain market dynamics that tend to hold true with every new era. So anyways, that'll wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Good to get back on the Sunday publishing of Weekend Perspective. And we will be traveling a lot. I will be traveling a lot. I have a ton of travel coming up, but we'll be doing my best to make sure we stay on the Wednesday and Sunday publishing schedule. Thank you all for being flexible with us. Thank you all for continuing to listen, continuing to tell a friend, helping us grow the show, and we appreciate that. And with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.